deep beneath the coral limestone of Saipan, in a cave that had become an improvised hospital, 23-year-old nurse Akiko Tanaka pressed a blood-soaked bandage against a soldier's shattered leg. The constant thunder of American artillery above sent tremors through the cave walls, dislodging dust that settled on the wounded, like gray snow. For 3 weeks she had worked without rest in this underground hell, watching supplies dwindle, and men die from wounds that proper medicine could have healed. The cave reeked of gangrene, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of blood. 47 wounded soldiers and civilians lay on makeshift stretchers fashioned from bamboo and torn uniforms. Akiko's medical bag, once filled with morphine, sulfa powder, and sterile bandages, now contained only dirty rags and a few precious vials of iodine. Her hands, once soft and clean, were now cracked and stained with the blood of men she couldn't save. Lieutenant Yamamoto, the cave's commanding officer, had been clear about their fate. When the Americans broke through, they were to destroy all medical supplies and commit suicide rather than face capture. The propaganda broadcasts from Tokyo had been explicit about American treatment of prisoners: torture, starvation, forced labor, until death. Better to die with honor than endure what the American demons would inflict upon captured Japanese. The radio broadcasts had painted vivid pictures of American brutality: prisoners forced to dig their own graves before execution, medical personnel worked to death in labor camps, Japanese women subjected to unspeakable humiliation. The Americans, according to Tokyo, were racial inferiors driven by hatred for the superior Japanese race. They would show no mercy, no honor, no recognition of medical neutrality. These propaganda messages had been reinforced daily through military indoctrination. Officers read from prepared scripts describing American atrocities in the Philippines and other captured territories. Soldiers were shown photographs, allegedly of tortured prisoners, though many appeared staged or doctored. The psychological preparation for capture was designed to make suicide preferable to surrender. But as Akiko knelt beside Private Suzuki, barely 18 years old with a festering chest wound, she couldn't reconcile the idea of destroying the few remaining medical supplies. The boy needed antibiotics she didn't have, surgery she couldn't perform in this cave. He would die within hours without proper treatment. Around her, other wounded men moaned in delirium, their infections spreading in the humid, unsanitary conditions. Corporal Watanabe, missing his left arm from a mortar explosion, whispered deliriously about his mother's cooking. Sergeant Kimura, with shrapnel embedded in his spine, hadn't moved his legs in 5 days. Old man Takeshi, a civilian caught in the crossfire, clutched a photograph of his grandchildren while blood seeped through bandages wrapped around his abdomen. Each represented a life that might be saved with proper medical care. The medical situation had deteriorated catastrophically during the siege. What began as a well-equipped field hospital had devolved into a charnel house. Surgical instruments had been lost or damaged. Anesthetics were exhausted after the first week. Antibiotics had run out 10 days ago. Even basic supplies like clean water and soap had become precious commodities hoarded for the most critical cases. The bombardment above intensified. Dust cascaded from the ceiling as explosions grew closer. Through the cave entrance, she could hear the distinctive crack of American rifles and the guttural shouts of Marines advancing through the jungle. The final assault had begun. After 24 days of siege, the American forces were closing in on the last Japanese strongholds. Lieutenant Yamamoto gathered the remaining able-bodied soldiers. His voice was steady despite the terror in his eyes. The Americans would reach them within minutes. It was time to implement the final protocol. Destroy everything. Leave nothing for the enemy. Die with honor rather than face the humiliation and torture that awaited prisoners. The emperor demanded death before dishonor. Yamamoto distributed hand grenades to destroy medical supplies and documents. The wounded who could move were given grenades for suicide attacks. Those too injured to fight would be given poison or quick deaths by their comrades. No one would fall alive into American hands. The propaganda had been clear about what awaited Japanese prisoners in American camps. The lieutenant's orders reflected months of psychological conditioning. Japanese military doctrine emphasized death before capture as the highest form of loyalty to the emperor. Surrender was portrayed as ultimate disgrace, worse than death itself. Families of captured soldiers faced social ostracism and official disapproval. The shame extended beyond the individual to encompass entire family lines. Akiko looked at the wounded men who couldn't move, couldn't fight, couldn't even lift their heads. They would die here in this cave, either from their wounds or from American bullets, unless someone stayed to tend them, unless someone chose a different path. Her medical training had taught her to preserve life, not destroy it. Could she abandon these men to implement a protocol based on propaganda she had never witnessed firsthand? As Lieutenant Yamamoto prepared to detonate the medical supplies, Akiko made her decision. She had taken an oath to preserve life, not destroy it. Whatever the Americans might do to her, she couldn't abandon these wounded men. She couldn't destroy medicine that might save lives, even if those lives belonged to enemies. Her duty as a medical professional transcended political loyalty. The sound of American voices echoed from the cave entrance. English words, harsh and foreign, growing louder. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing the carnage within. Akiko raised her hands slowly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. This was the moment she had been taught to fear above all others. The moment when Japanese propaganda would be tested against American reality. 3 American Marines entered cautiously, weapons raised. They wore dirty uniforms and helmets marked with medical crosses. Behind them came a man in his 30s with a Red Cross armband, clearly a medic. His eyes swept the cave, taking in the wounded, the primitive conditions, the young Japanese woman kneeling among the casualties with her hands raised in surrender. The lead Marine, a sergeant with 3 stripes, barked orders in English. Akiko understood none of the words, but the tone was professional, controlled. Not the savage brutality she had expected. The medic approached her slowly, his weapon lowered. He pointed to the wounded soldiers around her, then to the medical supplies scattered on the cave floor. His expression was questioning, not threatening. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, securing the cave while assessing the medical situation. Their discipline was evident in every action. No random violence, no looting, no abuse of helpless prisoners. They followed clear protocols for handling captured medical facilities, protocols that prioritized securing wounded personnel and preserving medical supplies. The medic knelt beside Private Suzuki, examining the infected chest wound with professional competence. He checked the boy's pulse, lifted his eyelids to examine pupil response and assessed the extent of infection. His movements were those of a trained medical professional, not a brutal conqueror. He spoke quietly to the other Marines, pointing to various wounded men and indicating their medical conditions. Then he spoke a single word that changed everything. Nurse. He pointed to her, then to the wounded, then back to her. Nurse. The question was clear despite the language barrier. Was she medical personnel? Had she been treating these men? His tone carried professional respect, not the contempt she had expected from propaganda descriptions of American attitudes toward Japanese. Akiko nodded hesitantly, unsure what this admission might bring. Execution for treating enemy soldiers, torture for possessing medical knowledge. The propaganda had been clear about American treatment of captured medical personnel. They would be forced into slave labor, made to dig graves and latrines, worked to death in concentration camps. Medical knowledge would be extracted through torture before execution. Instead, the American medic reached into his pack and withdrew items that made Akiko's breath catch in her throat. Sterile gauze, still in its wrapper, a vial of morphine with an unbroken seal, antiseptic solution in a clean bottle, sulfa powder for preventing infection, medical supplies she hadn't seen in weeks, handed to her by the enemy she had been taught to fear above all others. The medic gestured toward the wounded Japanese soldiers, then handed her more supplies. Bandages, surgical instruments, even a small bottle of clean water. His meaning was unmistakable. Continue your work. Treat these men. We will not stop you. The Geneva Convention protected medical personnel, he indicated through gestures and broken Japanese phrases. She would continue practicing medicine. Akiko's hands trembled as she accepted the supplies. The morphine alone was worth more than gold in this place of suffering. The sterile bandages represented hope for men who had been dying of infection. These Americans, these supposed demons, were giving her the tools to save Japanese lives. Everything she had been told about American brutality seemed like stories from another world. The quality of the medical supplies astounded her. American manufacturing had produced bandages with consistent weave and sterility. The morphine came in precisely measured doses with clear labeling. Surgical instruments showed superior metallurgy and craftsmanship. Even basic items like adhesive tape demonstrated industrial capacity that Japanese forces had lost months earlier. Overwhelmed by the magnitude of this unexpected kindness, Akiko began to cry. Not the quiet tears of exhaustion she had shed in the cave, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from the core of her being. Everything she had been told, everything she had believed about the enemy, crumbled in the face of this simple act of professional courtesy. The propaganda had prepared her for demons, not for colleagues. The American medic, whose name tag read Thompson, gestured for her to follow him outside the cave. In the bright tropical sunlight, she could see the full scope of the American operation. A field hospital had been established near the captured Aslito airfield, with proper tents, surgical equipment, and medical personnel. Wounded American soldiers lay on stretchers alongside Japanese prisoners, receiving the same professional medical care. The contrast with conditions in the cave was staggering. Clean white tents instead of blood-soaked coral walls, proper surgical tables instead of bamboo stretchers, abundant medical supplies instead of dirty rags and empty bottles. American medics moved efficiently between patients, providing care that Akiko had only dreamed of during the siege. This was modern military medicine at its finest. The field hospital represented logistical capabilities that seemed impossible to someone who had experienced Japanese supply shortages. Fresh medical supplies arrived daily by transport aircraft. Refrigerated units preserved blood plasma and medications. Portable generators powered surgical equipment and lighting. The abundance contrasted sharply with Japanese forces, reduced to scavenging for basic necessities. Thompson led her to a supply tent where other medical personnel worked efficiently to treat casualties from both sides. He handed her a canteen of clean water, the first she had tasted in days. The water was cool, pure, free from the brackish taste of cave springs contaminated by seepage. Then came hot soup, thick with vegetables and meat, more nourishing than anything she had eaten since the siege began. The soup contained actual beef, carrots, and potatoes, ingredients that had become legendary during the final weeks of Japanese resistance. American logistics had maintained supply lines that brought fresh food to the front lines, while Japanese forces subsisted on rice and whatever they could forage. The contrast illustrated the industrial capacity that made American victory inevitable. Finally, Thompson provided a clean blanket, soft and warm, free from the lice and filth of the cave. The blanket was made of quality wool, manufactured in American factories that continued producing civilian goods, even while supporting the largest military effort in human history. Such abundance seemed impossible to someone who had experienced the desperate shortages of the Japanese war economy. Through gestures and broken English supplemented by a Japanese-American interpreter, Thompson explained that she would work under American supervision to treat Japanese wounded and civilians. The Geneva Convention of 1929, he indicated, protected medical personnel captured during conflict. She would not be forced into labor camps or subjected to torture. She would continue practicing medicine under international law. The interpreter, a Nisei soldier named Sergeant Yamada, explained American policy toward captured medical personnel. The United States followed international law regarding prisoners of war, particularly those with medical training. Akiko would be classified as a protected person under Geneva Convention protocols, allowed to continue medical practice under supervision while receiving proper food, housing, and treatment. Sergeant Yamada's presence itself contradicted Japanese propaganda about American racial policies. Here was a soldier of Japanese ancestry, serving with distinction in American forces, treated as an equal by his comrades. His family had been interned during the early war years, yet he chose to serve the country that had questioned his loyalty. His dedication to duty impressed Akiko profoundly. Over the following days, Akiko worked alongside American medics in the field hospital. Language barriers dissolved as medical knowledge proved universal. A wound was a wound, regardless of the nationality of the patient. Pain required morphine whether the sufferer wore Japanese or American uniform. Infection responded to sulfa powder without regard for political allegiance. Medical ethics transcended national boundaries. She watched American doctors perform surgery on Japanese soldiers with the same skill and dedication they showed treating their own wounded. Dr. Mitchell, a surgeon from Chicago, spent 4 hours repairing damage to a Japanese soldier's shattered pelvis, using techniques and equipment that would have been impossible in the cave hospital. The operation succeeded, saving the soldier's ability to walk. American nurses like Lieutenant Patricia O'Brien from Boston provided comfort to dying Japanese civilians with the same compassion they offered American casualties. O'Brien learned basic Japanese phrases to communicate with patients, showing respect for their dignity even in defeat. Her professional dedication impressed Akiko more than any propaganda about American character could have. The medical equipment available to American forces astounded Akiko. Portable X-ray machines for diagnosing fractures, blood plasma for treating shock, penicillin for fighting infections that would have been fatal in Japanese facilities, anesthetics that allowed complex surgeries impossible under primitive conditions. The technological superiority was overwhelming. American medical innovation extended beyond equipment to organizational efficiency. Triage systems prioritized patients based on medical need, rather than rank or nationality. Supply chains ensured consistent availability of medications and equipment. Training programs had prepared medics for tropical diseases and combat injuries. The systematic approach to military medicine demonstrated American industrial and educational advantages. Private Suzuki, the 18-year-old with the chest wound, survived because of American antibiotics and surgical intervention. Dr. Mitchell removed infected tissue, cleaned the wound cavity, and administered penicillin that eliminated the infection within days. Suzuki would recover completely, returning to Japan after the war to become a teacher, his life saved by enemy medical care. An elderly Japanese civilian woman delivered her baby safely because American medics provided clean conditions and proper obstetric care. Lieutenant O'Brien assisted with the delivery, ensuring sterile procedures that prevented infection for both mother and child. The baby, born healthy despite wartime conditions, represented hope for Japan's future beyond military defeat. A Japanese soldier with a shattered arm retained full use of his limb because American surgeons had the proper tools and expertise to repair the damage. The operation required precision instruments and surgical techniques that Japanese field medicine couldn't provide. The soldier would return home able to work and support his family, grateful for American medical competence. Akiko's presence proved invaluable in calming terrified Japanese civilians who had been taught that Americans were literal demons. Her ability to explain in Japanese that the Americans intended no harm, that they followed medical ethics and international law, helped bridge the gap between propaganda and reality. Slowly, fearfully, Japanese civilians began accepting American medical care. The work was exhausting but fulfilling in ways Akiko had never experienced. In the cave hospital, she had watched men die from treatable conditions because she lacked proper supplies. Here, with adequate medicine and equipment, she could actually save lives. The American medics treated her as a colleague, seeking her input on treating Japanese patients, respecting her medical knowledge despite her enemy status. Sergeant Thompson, she learned through the interpreter, had been a civilian doctor in Minnesota before the war. He spoke about medicine as a calling that transcended national boundaries, about the Hippocratic oath that bound all medical professionals to preserve life regardless of politics or warfare. His dedication to treating Japanese wounded with the same care as American casualties reflected principles Akiko recognized from her own medical training. Thompson's background illustrated the depth of American medical resources. Civilian doctors had been mobilized for military service, bringing advanced training and experience to battlefield medicine. Medical schools continued operating throughout the war, training new physicians while supporting military medical needs. The integration of civilian and military medical systems provided capabilities that Japanese forces couldn't match. The broader implications of Saipan's fall became clear as she worked in the hospital. This island, now in American hands, put the Japanese mainland within range of B-29 bombers. The war was effectively lost, though it would continue for another year. The civilians and soldiers she treated represented Japan's future, people who would need to rebuild their nation after defeat. Many Japanese civilians had chosen suicide rather than face capture, believing propaganda about American brutality. At Marpi Point, hundreds had jumped from cliffs rather than surrender to forces they believed would torture and kill them. But those who chose to live, who accepted American protection, discovered that propaganda bore no resemblance to reality. The tragedy at Marpi Point haunted Akiko as she worked with survivors. Entire families had chosen death rather than face imagined American brutality. Children had been thrown from cliffs by parents convinced that capture meant torture and slavery. The propaganda had been so effective that death seemed preferable to testing its accuracy against reality. The American approach to prisoners reflected a calculated strategy beyond mere humanitarian concern. Treating captured Japanese well served multiple purposes. It encouraged further surrenders, reducing American casualties in future battles. It provided intelligence from cooperative prisoners. It demonstrated American moral superiority over Japanese militarism. Most importantly, it laid groundwork for post-war reconciliation and reconstruction. For Akiko, the experience fundamentally altered her understanding of warfare, propaganda, and human nature. She had expected to face demons and instead found professional colleagues. She had anticipated torture and received medical supplies. She had feared forced labor and instead continued practicing medicine under conditions far better than those in the cave hospital. The medical ethics she witnessed transcended national boundaries. American medics risked their lives to evacuate wounded Japanese soldiers from dangerous areas under fire. American surgeons worked through the night to save Japanese civilians caught in crossfire. American nurses provided comfort to dying Japanese patients with the same tenderness they showed their own wounded. This professional dedication impressed Akiko more than any propaganda could have. These Americans weren't motivated by hatred or vengeance despite having every reason for both. They maintained medical standards because those standards defined their civilization. They treated enemies with dignity because dignity was a principle worth preserving even in total war against fascist barbarism. As weeks passed, Akiko's role expanded beyond treating Japanese casualties. She began assisting with American wounded as well, her medical skills valued regardless of the patient's nationality. Working alongside American nurses, she learned new techniques and procedures that would serve her well in post-war reconstruction of Japan's devastated medical system. The transformation wasn't limited to medical practice. Through daily interaction with American personnel, Akiko began questioning other aspects of Japanese propaganda. If Americans weren't the demons described in broadcasts from Tokyo, what else might be false? The claims about American society, about democratic weakness, about racial superiority, all seemed questionable when confronted with professional, competent, and humane American military medicine. Her letters home, when mail service resumed, carried messages that contradicted official Japanese propaganda. She wrote to her family about adequate food, medical care, and humane treatment. These letters, like thousands of others from Japanese prisoners, helped undermine remaining faith in government pronouncements among Japanese civilians already suffering under American bombing campaigns. The strategic value of this humane treatment extended beyond immediate military objectives. Japanese prisoners who experienced fair treatment became advocates for surrender rather than suicidal resistance. Civilians who received American medical care spread word that occupation might be survivable. This psychological warfare proved as effective as any military campaign in hastening Japan's surrender. For American medical personnel, treating Japanese prisoners reinforced their sense of moral superiority over fascist enemies. They demonstrated that democratic civilization could maintain ethical standards even under war's pressures. This wasn't weakness, but strength, proving that American values could survive total war without corruption. The medical statistics documented systematic care that contradicted Japanese propaganda about American brutality. Japanese prisoners received surgical procedures, medications, and rehabilitation at rates comparable to American casualties. Mortality from disease among prisoners remained lower than among Japanese civilians in occupied territories, reflecting superior American medical capabilities and commitment to international law. Captain Morrison, the chief medical officer, articulated the philosophy underlying this treatment. America fought to defend civilization against barbarism. Abandoning civilized standards in treating prisoners would represent moral defeat, regardless of military victory. Maintaining medical ethics while enemies practiced systematic brutality demonstrated which side truly represented human progress. This moral dimension of warfare impressed Japanese prisoners more than any military demonstration could have. They witnessed American strength expressed through restraint, American superiority demonstrated through adherence to international law, American civilization proven through professional medical care for enemies. These lessons would prove invaluable during post-war reconstruction and democratization of Japan. The Christmas season of 1944 brought unexpected moments of shared humanity. American medics distributed extra rations and small gifts to Japanese patients, gestures that transcended language barriers. Akiko helped organize a small ceremony where Japanese and American medical personnel honored colleagues killed during the Pacific Campaign, recognizing shared sacrifice in service of healing. These moments of connection between former enemies illustrated the potential for reconciliation beyond military defeat. Medical professionals from both nations found common ground in their dedication to preserving life, their respect for professional competence, and their commitment to ethical standards that transcended national boundaries. As the war moved toward its conclusion with the atomic bombings and Soviet entry, Akiko reflected on her transformation from terrified prisoner expecting torture to respected colleague working alongside former enemies. The medical supplies placed in her hands instead of forced labor tools had symbolized a choice between vengeance and healing, between perpetuating hatred and building bridges toward peace. The experience taught her that propaganda, however sophisticated, could not withstand direct contact with reality. The Americans she had been taught to fear as demons proved to be professional soldiers and medical personnel committed to ethical standards, even in total war. Their restraint and humanity in circumstances where brutality would have been understandable demonstrated the strength of democratic civilization. For thousands of Japanese prisoners and civilians who experienced American occupation, the reality of fair treatment contradicted years of propaganda about democratic weakness and American brutality. This cognitive dissonance opened minds to new possibilities for Japan's future, contributing to the relatively smooth transition from militarism to democracy during post-war reconstruction. The medical tent where Akiko first received supplies instead of a shovel became a symbol of choosing humanity over hatred, professional ethics over propaganda, and healing over vengeance. In that moment when American medics handed her sterile gauze and morphine rather than tools of forced labor, the foundation was laid for reconciliation between former enemies and the rebuilding of a peaceful, democratic Japan. The tears she shed upon receiving those medical supplies represented more than relief at unexpected kindness. They marked the beginning of a transformation from enemy to colleague, from prisoner to partner in healing, from victim of propaganda to witness of democratic values in action. The medicine in her hands instead of a shovel represented hope that even the deepest wounds of war could heal through professional dedication and shared humanity. If this story of unexpected humanity in the darkest moments of war moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more untold stories from history. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these powerful human experiences to light. If you're already part of our community, we'd be grateful for a like on this video. It helps others discover these important historical accounts. And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment when reality completely contradicted what you'd been told to expect? Share your reflections with our community. These stories of compassion transcending conflict remind us that even in humanity's darkest hours, individual acts of decency can change everything. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.